Good. So we're into the afternoon. Now is when we accelerate, into the future. It's life on an exponential curve. Even if you catch the curve, you got to keep running faster to stay in place. And I've been waiting for this panel all day long. The official title of the panel is Applying the Lessons of the Demo Today's Online World. But I like to call it the Two Tims and a Brew panel. Because you got Tim O'Reilly, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, and you've got Brewster Kahle, who's going to lead the discussion. So come on up here, gentlemen. Brewster, I'm going to put you in this chair.
Actually, I'm leading the discussion.
Oh, that's right. You're leading. I apologize.
I'll be called Tim for this
session. Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
That works?
Yeah.
Okay.
You kind of got us thinking about having a brew here. Would it be a... But so here we are, in some ways, if you think about 10 years ago, if you'd asked the question, are we living in this future of collective intelligence that Doug Engelbart drew for us, we would have said, yeah. Today, we're not so sure, right? Because we've come up with an awful lot in this incredibly optimistic vision that we've all been part of building that has gone sideways, or has it? So I wanted to talk to these two gentlemen, both of whom are pioneers in building this better world, this incredibly optimistic knowledge internet, but also among its fiercest critics, and trying to keep it on course towards its potential. So I don't know which of you would like to sort of jump in first, but I should probably have thought that.
I had a eureka moment
that
I think is relevant. It dates back a little bit. It was about 1990, 1991 when I first got to meet Ted Nelson. And this is going to be relevant. And I watched the whole demo, 140 minutes, an hour and 40 minutes yesterday, and I was like, yep, it still echoes that same sort of what? And so I had built this thing called Supertext. We call it Supertext at Thinking Machines, and then it rolled out as Waze, this pre-web publishing system. And I was really excited to finally get to meet Ted Nelson. And so I got to meet him, and we talked right past each other. And I came away from this like, why did that go wrong? Why did my conversation with Ted Nelson go so far wrong? And it was the same thing that when I was watching it, it was like, I thought I was building this hypertext system, this reading system. I was trying to build the Memex. I was trying to build the library of everything and that you could get. I was trying to build the reader's machine. And what Ted was trying to build was the writer's machine. The machine that was complex enough to capture what he was thinking and the interactions with other people and the overlapping and all those sorts of weavy things that you see in the demo. And I wasn't building that. And now we roll time forward. And I think really we've basically still been building the reader's machine. You can, Google is a freaking miracle. I mean, wow. And then the hypertext links, but it's all still kind of consumering what's going on. It's still doing that. We have 3 experiments in trying to make a writing machine. There's Wikipedia, there's Google Docs, another sort of magic wild thing, and Facebook, which is also kind of writing. But there's so much not this vision. There's so much not the Ted Nelson vision, that we have so much more to go. We have people actively poisoning the commons now. Right? We have people that are actively spoofing what's out there on the net. And that things are sort of going a little bit wrong on the writing side. So the good news is we've got a lot of work to do. So I think we're still even stumbling on building the library of everything, because it doesn't have everything. We copyright problems, blah, blah, blah. So I'd say we still are missing that piece.
Well, talking about this in terms of reading and writing seems to encapsulate a lot of the tension that we've seen over the last 30 years, certainly. I remember, when Tim, when you first introduced the World Wide Web, was this vision of reading and writing, and you built, kind of the model for both. But very quickly, it became much more a reading machine than a writing machine. And I know when we published Website, which was the first PC-based web server, in 1994, I think it was like, wow, we've got to get servers in people's hands as well. But we've seen this gradual erosion of the democratization of the writing. You think about how blogging became, Facebook, for example. And you're trying to get us back to the more balanced system. Can you talk a little bit about
I am.
How that's going?
I'm trying to get us back to the original vision. Yeah, so the original, never mind, so Netscape, so the original web browser, World Wide Web.app, which was on the next, so the things were called .app. That was the idea of that was that you could, if you realized the two things related, you could mark one, you could link to the other, Command-Shift-M, Command-Shift-L, save everything back to the web, and you would have saved a little important piece about this project for all the people you're working with. For me at CERN, the web was very much supposed to be a space where it was a pool of knowledge which we were in equilibrium with, in the sense that if I thought of something which wasn't in the web, I could very easily add it, and then you'd immediately see it.
Yeah.
So we'd be sharing this thing, and so our minds will basically be melding, because we each have melded with the web, and it would be a read-write web. So being read-write was really important. And then the browsers took off as being very powerful when HTML became more complicated, writing an editor became more complicated. And it slipped from having been originally an idea that everybody would be reading and writing to the same extent, to being one where it seems to be more production pipelines. It was more like sort of newspaper production pipelines. Ted Nelson, by the way, one of the nice things he says about readers and writers is that the reader and the writer are two gods. They're both divine, they're omnipotent, because the writer can write whatever they like, and the reader doesn't have to read it. And that I love. So these two gods are they're sort of out there. So that if you like, you can look at the web, and a lot of the human record is of people going down those paths to different extents. But the neat thing that happened early on in the web was that we ended up with the blogosphere, and then in the blogosphere, people were writing stuff, and sometimes they wrote it and put it onto a computer in their own basement, plugged the computer in, and then they got people to link to their blog, and they linked to other people's blog. And the process was that they tried to make the blog as good as possible, and they tried to link to things which were as cool as possible. And they did that they put a huge amount of effort into making sure not only that the text, but also the links were really high quality. And as a result, they found they were part of this incredible, ridiculous world in which all the people they met on the web were making more and more high-quality information, and more questions that they asked got more and more high-quality answers. And even before Google came along, you could use these links to find stuff. And then Google came along and used the links and used all the effort people had put into those links. And so that world was, when people in that world complained to me that they'd found garbage on the web, I would say, do not complain to me. Okay, go somewhere else. There is lots of good stuff, I can tell you. The way the web works is that you just find the good stuff and you keep reading it. And you and all the people, all of us in this room probably spent 15 years finding good stuff, down the road after a bit using Google to find good stuff, still just using links as well, finding good stuff and reading it, and it was good. And then, a couple of years ago, this philosophy that all we had to do is make sure there's good stuff, that we're contributing good stuff and linking to good stuff, and then we will be reading good stuff and making, which worked for Wikipedia, broke down. Because we discovered that all the stuff which I told you to ignore, all the garbage out there's a lot of stuff out there which, the fact that it was there didn't affect our lives, it didn't affect my life, it didn't affect your life, you'd learned not to read it. But it turns out there was a very large proportion of humanity who did read it. And that wouldn't have been a problem at all, apart from they vote.
Right. Well, we spent.
Damn. And suddenly, suddenly after Trump and Brexit, I think the Web Foundation, we said, okay, mid-course correction, left, because we're not just about keeping the web open and free and open and royalty-free, because we can see that when you do that, and you build wonderful things like Wikipedia, also bad stuff will happen. And in fact, for democracy, we actually have to try to build a world where the good stuff outnumbers the bad stuff. And just living in our own filter bubbles of good stuff isn't good enough for the world. So big, massive change in attitude, massive change in philosophy, realizing we have a duty not just to make our bot clean, but to make sure that other people, in fact, are led in the direction of truth and constructive criticism.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah. Clearly, one of the ways that went wrong was that we went from a world in which all of the incentives, for example, for search engines and social media, were to surface the good stuff. There was the dark discovery that actually it was profitable to surface the bad stuff.
Yeah.
So we have to understand what are the incentives in the system that we built. We sort of assumed good intentions, good incentives. But I want to bring up something else that strikes me very much in the context of Doug's idea of bootstrapping collective intelligence. And that is that there's, if you look back 50 years, there was a very, a human, in the cockpit kind of model of collective intelligence. Which is, we have all these tools that make us smarter. I am the center of this thing, and I am consuming and controlling and managing. And in fact, the collective intelligence applications we are contributing to, and sometimes we're not even, they're even, we're building autonomic subconscious systems. You think about, the collective intelligence of traffic routing in Google Maps or in an app like Uber. This is clearly collective intelligence, is clearly bootstrapped, and it's clearly, incredibly useful and kind of a paradigm for many, many other kinds of collective knowledge that are being built. Are we holding the web back, or are we just are we in the early stages of not really knowing how to use this new tool that we built? And, in some sense, as we get better at sort of harnessing that intelligence, might we, bring it back on track, not by going backwards, but by going forwards?
Yes, going forward is, we're going to do this. So back in the day, you could run a web server on your next machine, right? You'd have an IP address that people could connect to. Well, that didn't really work all that well. It would go up and down all the time. It was okay. In the weekend, it would turn off. And so we ended up sort of centralizing these things in these co-location centers, and then we started centralizing them into specific companies. And it was all very convenient and easy that way, but we lost part of the biological ecosystem. I was really struck by the concept of evolve, right? Bootstrap. It's not like, oh, here's the answer given to you by some god in Silicon Valley that has lots of zeros in their bank account, but it's us. Yeah. It's somehow us going and building this. That it was a combination of people, computers, and network. And you don't want one to be much more powerful than the other. I think you're saying that the computers are becoming more powerful than we kind of are aware of, and that's true. But we've also lost a mechanism of sharing. So the open source software worked quite well until things really got kind of centralized in these companies and they didn't share. And we now have views, a bunch of the ideas of Doug's, was that you could have the data and you could have your own view on it. That's gone. You get Facebook's view on it. You get Twitter's view on it. You can't change it. Yeah. We've lost agency. Yeah. Another thing that was interesting about this demo for me was how coders and the communicators were the same people. Yeah. That you can make your own world the way you wanted it. And I haven't seen that really active since GNU Emacs or the Lisp machine. And so I think we can go and again go forward, because we now have browsers that can run code. These browsers can run whole operating systems in the browser in JavaScript itself. And we can go and use that to be our agent for us, our fiduciary, our point of view on the world and resource things. But that's cool.
Coming back to Tim's earlier point, one of the original sins that led us astray was that we built for ourselves who were able to do these things, and then it was adapted for people who were not able to who were not programmers. And so the question is, how do we take that vision of control and agency away from, well, if you're a programmer, we'll get it back for you. But what about if you're, someone who doesn't have not only the skill but the interest in programming? How do we make this knowledge appliance that this knowledge system that works for everybody?
So first of all, you give everybody solid surface. You give everybody solid.
Q solid.
Then that changes. It doesn't. It's not a magic bullet, but it changes things a lot because you talked about. So in a solid world, to start off by default, when you run an app, it says which pod do you want to store this in. A pod is an online thing, or a pod is something you're running in your garage, or your pod is something that you run in your living room. You guys, you're pretty geeky. You guys will go and download the Node Solid Server software and run it on a Mac Mini or a Raspberry Pi or something before the day is out, I should think. So when you run it whether you run it in your living room or somebody that you trust runs your Solid pod, the way it works technically is the Solid pod just stores data. It will store data for any app. There's a universal API. There's not just a Twitter API and a Facebook API and a Photos API, or there is one API for any apps, which makes a massive social difference because any app can talk to any pod. That means that any app will ask you where you want to store the data, because the pod controls the access control, allows you to store it, to share it with anybody or nobody. By default, it turns the whole privacy thing upside down. I should say, it turns the privacy thing right side up, because by default, you own your data and you control your data. By default, your data isn't in a silo. So and by having this universal API and breaking the apps apart from there aren't any silos. So when you build an app, the good news is when you're building an app, you just write the code and people will use it and they can give you money for it, and it will store the data in all their pods out there. You don't have to build a back end. So there's no back end engineering. We just build one solid app, one solid server. And so it's a massive change. It's quite difficult to explain to people, but it is very enabling. It's very empowering. And it works very well, in fact, in a world in which, because it gives people control of their data. It means that possibly down the road, if this thing takes off, and if you go out and look at it and help us put it together, then down the road, I will have not only the bank statement data, which I already have in my pod downloaded, not only some of the hospital stuff, but we will also have all the fitness data from the gyms and the fitness data from my phone apps, and we will have and I'll have all my credit card data, and I will have all the data to do with any of the people I've connected with, and all of my purchase history from all of the places that I have bought stuff from. I will demand to have available, and so that means that I'm now looking at a massive trove of data about myself. And nobody's really looked at doing that. Nobody's really looked at building apps which actually use that. So if I build an AI which looks at all the data I have about myself, that is really interesting. And so then we're looking at a world in which we need to have apps which are trusted. And so that means, and people are saying, I want to pay for app, I want to pay for AI instead of having it. And so we're also looking at a world where a lot of the apps won't be ad funded. And in a way, you can look at if you look at Doug Engelbart's dream that the computers should help us right now, and you turn on a computer and it helps you, but at a certain point it persuades you to buy something instead of doing what you were going to do. So what's wrong with this picture?
Yeah, let me ask this question though. If you look at Facebook's current crisis of trust, it seems to me that we're potentially at an inflection point where we, the people, are part of these massive systems, and they depend on us ultimately. And it's something like, in some sense, the consent of the governed, which is a very old concept. But in some sense, we have built these new techno-monarchies, which we are coming up to our Tea Party moment, so to speak, where we're saying, no, we don't trust you anymore. You have violated our trust. You know, no data taxation without representation. And so the question I have is, do we need to have a completely new architecture, which is kind of what you're arguing. And I think if we had started with that architecture, we might have had a very different world. It seems hard to me to go backwards to a whole new system, given the entrenched systems of power and the incentives. You know, it's like the web was free versus things that were expensive. Whereas now all these services are free to ordinary people. They're free and powerful and getting better and useful. And so it is really about how do we build new systems where the people who run these systems are forced by the people who are part of them. And that means, for example, the Google walkout. It means the blowback against Facebook. It means people who are figuring out how to use the political process. Are there ways that our interaction as individuals and as collections of individuals need to regain our power in this new context?
I think we can get some of the way there easily and some of it really hard.
Yeah.
So we are trying to go forward. So there's going and owning your own data. There's another whole approach towards having decentralized web. So you basically have your peer-to-peer backend of the web, where you basically use permissions based on encryption. So the data exists in many, many places, and it can move towards you. So there's basically a content distribution network that would move towards you. Cool ideas, right? And there are many people that are actually working towards this. Are we going to get there, or is it going to be like, oh no, it's just not going to happen? I'm kind of I guess a tech utopian in some sense, that we can use this and make steps forward. And then again, looking at this demo, and it's like, why did some of this demo happen in the 1960s? And Doug talked about developing a bunch of this at SRI under DARPA and NASA funding, long term. DARPA and ARPA, actually, importantly, ARPA, not DARPA, funding. Then they also worked with Stanford. They swapped technologies with RAND. They basically went around and pulled lots of things together. And it reminded me, it's like, wow, when I was in college and at MIT, we built a supercomputer. Right? At Berkeley, there were 30 people working on an operating system. There were these long-term investments that didn't have the silos that we have now. Where did those silos come from? So I looked up, when did venture capitalists really take off? And it was sort of in that, after that era. And right now, you're really striving to go and say, I'm going to kill that guy, right? And that's going to be your business model. Give me money because I'm going to kill him. And it's like,
it's going to be winners take all.
Winner take all, and it's all these sorts of, let's have non-disclosures all around, shall we? And it's just the least sharing environment now of what we've built up here, and we end up with app world that doesn't share worth a damn. And so, you can build on my platform, right? But what? How about use my stuff to go and make your thing better? What happened to that? So I think that's going to be really hard to go and redo. Yeah. The government doesn't seem to be particularly up for it anymore. Or should it be? Though often the greatest research going on now are in these closed environments, like Google. One of my favorite music researchers at Columbia University left Columbia University because he couldn't get the data he needed to do his cool research. He went to Google. So we're doing something wrong, I think, structurally, that made this thing possible. Yeah. In a way that we've gone a little bit wrong. I think we have the technologies, we have the ideas, there's solid, there's decentralized web, there's ways of going and detaching the files from the code, so you can have multiple pieces of code work on the same files and have that be new and cool and different and interesting. Will we get there? I think it depends on people like in this room that want to see a long-term future come about. The weird thing is, a lot of us are rich. So we can actually go and cause some of this to happen. I'm impressed by the nonprofits that are coming around. Wikipedia is another miracle.
Yeah.
And that it's a nonprofit and the #5 website out there. It's kind of cool. You know, Internet Archive, EF, the best.
Jupyter Notebook's wonderful.
Jupyter
knowledge-sharing
Notebooks,
tool.
they're Git sold for $19 billion. That was all about sharing. So the sharing ethos is alive. That the 1980s idea that people will only do things for money is just not true, right? The web shattered that that idea. People want to be known as long as they don't want to feel like they're being taken advantage of. Let's make systems, and I think that Doug's, Ted Nelson's, those ideas are good. Let's roll it forward.
So I want to ask something else, which is, there's a wonderful line from the poet Wallace Stevens, who once said, "The poem is the cry of its occasion." And I think this is also true of tech. You know, the technology we build is the cry of its occasion. You know, a lot of the, digital computing was originally invented, in a military context. It was command and control systems. And then when we got to this, this current era, it really was around this abundance of knowledge and sharing knowledge. And it seems to me that we are heading into dark times where there will be a cry of a very different occasion. Will we be able to muster the collective intelligence and collective will to deal with climate change? Will we be able to, muster the collective will to actually figure out how do we govern ourselves in this context where people can be so easily manipulated? When I think about collective intelligence and the challenges of collective intelligence and bootstrapping collective intelligence as these key concepts from Doug, how might we actually say, okay, with everything we've got, what do we need to do to rise to those occasions?
I think that when you were talking about web science earlier,
Yeah.
that was that's more than 10 years ago we started about web science, okay? Because we just felt that the way the web was behaving is the way humanity actually by technology it was more complicated than the human brain, and we were studying it less than we were studying the human brain, and we had to understand what the macroscopic effects and the unintended consequences would be of the designs of the microscopic protocols that we let loose out there. So if there's the odd ray of hope out there, one ray of hope is that actually, when you look, you mentioned climate change. The difficulty was getting most people to admit that it was anthropogenic. Okay, that the fact that those fires actually come about indirectly from things that we ought to have fixed a long time ago. It's reasonable for people in the street not to understand that climate change is anthropogenic. It is not reasonable for them not to understand that social networks are anthropogenic. These things are programmed by people. People sitting there in their offices thinking, what color shall I make the like button today? And realizing in the back of their minds that the color they make the like button may have a massive effect on the propagation intensity of different forms of emotion across the web, given all the cultural language there is between colors and like buttons. So in fact, so the good news is actually, if we sat down and did a huge amounts of long-term, well-funded research to understand how people work, the system of humanity connected by technology, and we looked at some of the things like the WhatsApp avalanche that led to genocide in Myanmar, like bad things that have happened out there. If we looked at Twitter and looked at the rate at which different emotions propagate across Twitter, and then look at different versions, and we do A/B testing, perish the thought, on people in Twitter to find out how different colors. I think we should be able to learn.
Yeah.
We built Wikipedia, yes. The Wikipedia seems to be, people agree, produces more light than heat. We've got places like Twitter where the jury's out as to whether there's a net benefit, but if they were tweaked a little bit, they could change. We've got new social networks that you could design tomorrow and just put out there on the web, which could be, take Reddit and combine it with Twitter and throw in a bit of this. So I think, my ray of hope is actually we could design social networks to be constructive to be the sorts of network
This kind of goes
I'd
back
wanted
though, to Brewster's point that there are incentives that lead these systems to effectively, imagine for a moment that you have a group of epidemiologists trying to stop the spread of Ebola, and they're incentivized instead to spread it.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's kind of the world that we're in, you know, where there are financial advantages to spreading the contagion rather than suppressing it. So the fact that we have the capabilities to suppress it, to, for example, instead of saying, oh, if we make the like button this color, it will amplify, you go, oh, if we make the color this color, it will suppress. You know, effectively, cognitive bias, noise cancellation is something we could do algorithmically, as well as all of the effort of Silicon Valley is cognitive bias, noise amplification. You know, and so again, I think there's a real challenge for all of us who have this vision of collective intelligence to say, how do we build systems that actually make us smarter, and why aren't we doing it?
Let me hit that, at least something we should do. It's not going to be the end goal, but it's something that's a precursor. If we have central points of control, we're lost. If we're,
I'm not sure I buy that. I feel like I believe that humans can make good ethical choices.
But let's keep up the number of choices.
Yeah, no,
let's
that's
make
fair.
it so that there's some choices. And so if we take the wars of the internet, the actually underlying plumbing layers, there are very few ISPs anymore that make a difference. The open source layer, actually, I'd say is doing pretty well. The content layer is getting locked up. And I'm carrying around a phone that is kind of locked top to bottom, right? Going and changing the operating system on this thing is called jailbreaking. What? So we're basically locking in the winners. And if we do that, we will lose. The antitrust structures aren't working terribly well.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we can wish that back into existence. But if we have to go and put back in our pockets to go and sort of take the taking away of choice. Let's have lots of experiments running around. Let's make it so that it can evolve. So it's not like, oh, well, let's just wait for them to come out with that feature. Let's put that feature in ourselves.
Yeah.
So that, I think it's a piece that we technologists, and Silicon Valley plays an inordinately strong role in this. I mean, for better or for worse, a lot of the miracles and the nightmares that are coming about are our fault, right? Our fault writ large. Let's fix it. Let's find some ways to go and make it so that the next generation of people don't have to go and fight their way through too many structures to come up with something better than what we're so proud of.
I just do want to really emphasize, though, this aspect of moral choice, which is our ultimate agency. And I do, you know, like you hear, for example, people are saying, I don't want to work at Facebook anymore, right? Because they're not living up to my values. You had a walkout of tens of thousands of people at Google, right? You know, saying, hey, we want to hold you, you know, and so to our values. And I think, you know, there's certainly, and there's been, you know, there's political activism in these systems. And I guess for me, I don't think we should just be looking for technical fixes. You know, we need to call out to people, say, these systems aggregate our will, our intention, our knowledge, and we have to assert ourselves and learn how to assert ourselves in these massive systems. Because I think our humanity, what we collectively believe, you know, leads people, you know, at the helm to make better choices. It leads them to shape the systems that we live in. You know, again, I keep going back to, you know, there are times in history where people believe crazy things, and then they wake up and they say, what do you mean? You know, again, I keep going back, like, to the American Revolution. They, you know, the people in Europe thought that George Washington would become king in America. And when he stepped down, they were like, what the, you know? It was like unbelievable. This guy walked away from power, you know, and it was this new idea. And I think there's new ideas about how we shape and how we live in this collective that we've built. You know, rather than saying we got to just throw it out and start over. No, it's like we must call out in ourselves to a new kind of of collective networked morality, a shared set of values that will lead us back towards this idea of this is for solving problems. This is for making the world more prosperous. This is for making us smarter.
Yes, we should. But we should, but we don't have to start with the huge properties.
Yeah.
I think one of the things which you've said before now, and we met in an airport lounge somewhere, and I was talking about this, sort of my vision of how things we will start, everybody will be, it will be decentralized here. And you say it's not going to happen because Facebook is a thing. And so, well, the web happened despite the fact that AOL was a thing. AOL was pretty big, and they were put together.
Yeah.
But if you look at the formula for how quickly the group of people using the web grew, the formula was about how exciting it was, how interesting, novel it was, how they heard about it, what they were looking for. It was about the extra value that it gave them compared to other things. It was about the sparkle in their eye because they imagined how the future could be. But it wasn't related to whether there was 1,000 people on AOL or 1 million people. And now we have, now actually the number of people who are picking up Solid is not related to whether there are 1 million people on Facebook or actually there's 1 billion people on Facebook.
Yeah.
So when you start a new community, if you do, and you should start lots and lots of them with all these ideas in mind, then what you should do is look to that community, try it out. See, just as there were lots and lots of versions of Wikipedia, some of which were better than others, and this particular community managed to hone Wikipedia to be something which over the years has continued to, has morphed. Do that with your communities, and start them small. You don't have to change. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let each flower being a different way of trying to build a respectable, positive, democratic society.
I've got a motto for our new apps. Let's make. My son said, you know, Dad, all the cool new apps are somewhat creepy. And it was like, he's completely right. My wife just bought a Tesla. And the Tesla is a connected device. I'm driving an iPad. This iPad, the Tesla knows everywhere I've gone. It has all the cameras. It knows all of this stuff. It's all a little bit creepy. So can we go and make cool apps that aren't creepy? I think we can. I think... I think we can make it so that the information doesn't leak. When I distributed Waze, this early internet publishing system, I put in an essay called The Ethics of Digital Librarianship. That if you run a Waze server which answered questions for others, you're going to accumulate information about users that they don't know they're giving to you. It comes with responsibility. That responsibility and trust has been violated. And it's been not only violated by corporations, but also by governments. And so let's make apps that aren't creepy. I don't think it's going to be easy to make things defended against well-funded foreign or state-sponsored attacks. That is super hard. We have to go and control that urge some other way. But I think we can go and build some of our technologies that at least that pass the smell test. Well, and I think we're doing a lot of technologies that aren't passing that smell test.
No, I would agree. I'm thinking as you're talking about the market. And there are two sides to the market. And if anybody here is a fan of Adam Smith and has not read The Theory of Moral Sentiments, you don't understand Adam Smith, because he believed very strongly that our morality is a check on self-interest. And our morality includes the ability to persuade each other of shared values. And that is my answer. Somebody was asking from the audience, what happens when people don't want that? It is our job as leaders to persuade people about what is good, and to persuade people to long to be a society that solves problems, that lifts people up, that isn't about, as they said in the 80s, greed is good. We got to throw off these decades where we took the wrong path and come back to saying this stuff was built so that we could create a better world.
Yeah.